Now I'm getting weirdly nervous.
Yeah, just do it, man.
Hello, we are gathered today for our first episode, or first, what should I call it?
First try.
Try!
Kick at the can.
Of burning questions with teachers. My name is Mimi.
I'm Jordan.
And what we did is we asked our colleagues on social media, Facebook, Twitter, to ask us some questions that they had that maybe they wanted us to address regarding teaching at all levels, not just university. And we have them all in here. Okay, so before we begin, let's just start with some introductions. So my name is Mimi, and I teach at the University of Alberta. Right now I'm teaching a Japanese language course as well as a pop culture course. I finished my PhD in comparative literature and modern languages and cultural studies last year, and I would like to introduce to you my teaching mentor, Jordan Long. Jordan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I am a second/third year PhD student at UBC Vancouver, but I teach here at the U of A and have been teaching here since 2013. There's policy at UBC that doesn't allow me to teach, and so I'm back here doing what I love while still being able to be a student.
What courses do you teach
out west? I teach an educational ethics and law course to fourth year student teachers who are just about to go on their practicums or have just come back. So that's what I teach here, 2 sections of that.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, so let's begin. Okay, so let's start with our first round of questions. I'm going to ask Jordan here. I'm going to shake it up. Shake, 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 shake. Ta-da!
My hand fits in here.
Oh, geez,
Doesn't quite. Okay, first question comes to us.
Yeah.
Says, when you're teaching in class, sometimes you discuss tangential topics beyond the scope of the course in hopes of enriching students' understanding. But then you're hit with a raised hand and the dreaded question, quote, will this be on the exam? What would be your approach to this situation? If you say no, the entire class will lose attention immediately. So it's an important question. In other words, I think I interpret it as a lot of us are struggling with the fact that students are in our room with their number one motivation being grades on tests. We know that. I think there's good scholarship that proves that. And so we try to make sure that we're not just teaching to tests, but we're teaching to the courses, the course content, and trying to get them engaged in the topics beyond what's going to be on the test. So how do you approach that?
Well, for me, it's different depending on, or it depends on the kind of courses that you teach, right? So for language courses, we don't really teach anything outside of what's not going to be on the exam or the midterm, right? Everything that they're tested on is everything that we practice, learn, review in class, right?
Sure.
Would you ever tell your students that this is not going to be on the exam and so you should not care?
Yeah, no, of course not. So here's what I always try to do, and we've discussed this many times. It's always and should always be about the intended learning outcomes. And so if you list those intended learning outcomes and make it clear to the students, what they're responsible to know, students be able to blah, blah, blah. I think, as this quote says, enriching students' understanding. If it's a topic that's outside of that learning outcome, I think that's totally fine. I wonder how much time you should be spending on it. If it's outside of the learning outcomes. That being said, there are really wholesome, organic things that can happen in a classroom.
I think so.
Where students might ask a question that's not directly aligned with the content or the learning outcome, or that you bring up as a story or a personal experience that I think can, quote, enrich students' experiences in the classroom. And I think that's fine. Interestingly enough, I heard a quote. I was in my second year of secondary teaching grade 8s and 9s. I went to what's called the Alberta Assessment Consortium. And it's a group of teachers that are interested in learning how to do assessment better in secondary and primary schools. And there was a researcher out of the States that had done a large quantitative study with a large N population in the States in secondary schools. And something like high 70s, something like 75, 76% of students agreed with the term blah, blah, blah test on Friday. And for me, that quote right there it rings true to me in my experiences as a secondary teacher and student, and even as a post-secondary student and teacher. And it's an unfortunate one, but it's one that we've made for ourselves, right? It's not their fault.
Yeah.
I think it's the way we've been teaching for all these years.
Okay.
And so that's an important question. Will this be on the exam? You could say no. You could say maybe and try to trick your students, or you could say something like, remember to always think about the central issue, and that's the intended learning outcomes. So if I talked about this story or this enriching topic that I'm trying to give you, an experience, it's because it matters and it's linked to the learning outcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Always link it back to the learning outcome.
That's where I go to for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Okay. On to our second question.
All right.
Go ahead, pal. Reach in there. You got it.
Okay. Oh. How do you deal with students who are disruptive in class?
Great question.
It is a good question. I wonder what kind of disruption this.
Yeah, that matters. What kind of disruption is happening? If it's verbal, if it's nonverbal, etc. I have some pretty educational answers, so maybe I'll let you start.
So, for example, I mean, disruption in terms of students talking in class, and if the space of the classroom allows you to walk sort of closer to them, then that's what I do. Or I kind of stare at my students if they're talking in the back.
Stare or glare?
No.
I think there's a difference.
And I shoot the beams at my eyes.
Yeah.
No, but I kind of just draw attention through my eyes, through my glance. Like I don't do this or give my students a dirty look. It's just more like as I'm talking, I always make eye contact, but all of a sudden if my eyes just sort of focus on a specific portion of the room, then once the student stops talking or whatever she's doing or he's doing, playing on his or her phone, then they're like.
So you think it tends to work?
It works for me, right?
Yeah.
And also walking closer with the wearing high heels helps.
Of course, the clicking and the clacking. Yeah, they hear that.
Yeah. So that's how I deal with disruptive students in the classroom, right? I think the term that you said was, you taught me something proximity.
That's right. Yeah, so that's why I wanted you to start. So there used to be a course here at the U of A, what I thought was the most useful course for a future teacher.
Okay.
And it was called Managing the Learning Environment.
Oh.
That was actually my first course that I started teaching here. And one of the strategies that we teach is called proximal interference.
Okay.
So that's is where, just through proximity, through a close physical location with a student that might be disruptive in both a verbal or nonverbal way, tends to work. Okay. You kind of catch students red-handed, and instead of disrupting the entire class by saying, Johnny, put that phone away, what you do is you quietly, as you're teaching or as you're talking or as the students are doing work, you just move in that direction. And it's almost a psychological trick that the students kind of, they click in with your clacking of your shoes or something, and they get back to it.
She's coming.
Now, that's in a secondary or primary school setting. In post-secondary education, I think this is actually a really interesting topic because we assume that we're teaching adults that are mature, that they're there for their own choice and they have their own autonomy to get there. My course is a mandatory course. Okay. It's not an elected course.
Oh, I see.
And so these students have to be there whether they like it or not. Now, there's a number of different sections. And so some students find the content dry and some really like it. And that's partly on me, of course, to make it engaging for them. Okay. But of course, there are times when students are on their phones or they're on their electronic device in some respect, and they're disengaged. And so proximal interference can work, but it takes a keen eye and some skills, I think some experience to keep talking and looking at your slides and reading the room and seeing who's not and then moving in that direction. But that's only if you take the position that it's important to teach an adult to pay attention in class.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
So this is hard, and this is hard to say I'm going to try to say it in a suggestive way.
Okay.
It could be the lecture, and it could be the lecturer.
Yeah,
right?
You're right.
And so if you're disengaging students through the lecture, whatever it is, your voice or the content, I think it's really important to make sure that through experience, every second or third slide, you're doing things to engage them together.
Yeah. And that's really good advice that I actually applied after you came to observe like my sci-fi course, right? Now I have a little bit of lecture, discussion, a little bit of lecture, followed by another discussion question. And I think that tends to, by breaking up the class like that, it tends to allow students to kind of focus and then sort of disengage, right? But not disengage away from like the lecture and like the discussion itself, but for them to be doing something else because they need that, right?
Sure, yeah. So it's important to be walking around the room, especially if you're able to do that in a smaller setting. But it's also, I think it's really important for you to keep students engaged through your lecture. And so it can't just be sit and get anymore. It has to be sit, get, and participate. And that has to happen simultaneously or concomitantly, where you integrate engaging discussions throughout your lesson.
Good, yeah. All right. Okay, so now we're going on to the next question.
I'll get Mimi to pull it out and I'll read it for you.
My hands are smaller.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Thank you. Okay, this question says, what do you do when a student that has improved in a particular aspect after you have helped them starts to fall back into their old habits again? Do you change your approach the second time around? So you've helped the student improve, but they seem to be slipping back into old habits, things that aren't going to make them successful in your class. Do you change your approach the second time?
I think, is it okay if I start?
Absolutely.
I think it depends on how much you care as an instructor, right? Like to me, for instance, if I have a student who is struggling in my class, I reach out to him or her and they finally come to my office hours, or they finally are improving, right? Showing signs of improvement on their quizzes or whatever, tests, assessments, right? But then all of a sudden, they stop attending lecture. They stop coming to my office hours for help. I would still reach out to them because I think maybe those types of students, they just need that one email, right? To be reminded, like, oh, this teacher actually cares. I can't give up, right? And like, if I could be that person for like that student, then yeah. Luckily, you know, in a class of say like 30 or like 20 or even 40, like you may have like one or two students that are like that. Not everyone's like that, so it's manageable. But if more than like half the class is like that, it's probably on you.
Yeah, you gotta wonder. There's questions, there's serious questions that you need to ask yourself. What is actually happening here?
Right? But you have to also, you know, be understanding of students who are registered with like SAS, the Student Accessibility Services, and reach out to them to a logical means, to a means that you're capable of managing yourself. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with attendance, specifically on attendance, because that can be an issue for a number of us in a post-secondary setting. I find it a bit easier because I'm in a field that is so-called a professional field. And so we expect our students to be just like teachers. And so teachers don't get to show up to work late, you know, because society expects them to achieve a certain level of professionalism. And so we try to encourage those habits as student teachers in our rooms. And so it might be easier for me to say, you know, make sure you're here on time, make sure you're here every day, because this eventually will translate to your habits later in life. So attendance might be one issue, but this question's about a second time. So they fall back into that same kind of bad habits. Do you try again?
Yes.
You had said absolutely, and I think so too. Do you change your approach on the second time? Does it become more?
Well, you have to learn like what maybe your approach wasn't. It wasn't as the first time, right?
It wasn't as effectual as you had hoped. Yeah. So I think it's important to change your approach. Like I said, because it's a professional degree, I take it one more step in a serious tone. So I try to be quote unquote firm but fair. A lot of people use those words. And so you say, listen, this is about your learning and I care about your success, but it's really important that you quit slipping back in those habits. And so I want you here on time, showing up to class every day, making sure that you're studying in your quizzes, right? But you really have to make sure that that it's not completely you as the instructor. Surely you have some impact in that, but it's about empowering the student to do a better job, right? And so you need to leave them with some kind of experience where they're thinking, crap, I can't keep making the same mistakes. It's on me. I have to do a better job. So I think being more serious is the tone there.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you don't have to be completely serious and
Yeah.
robotic in class. You can still tell jokes and be humorous and be personal, but
Yep.
you know, doing that as an aside with a student, I think, is a good strategy.
And I think like the more that student comes to see you, or the more you reach out, like you're able to be more firm with that student.
For sure.
Because you know how he or she is.
Yeah,
or,
you've created that connection.
Yeah.
I think the rule of thumb and like the paycheck that we can take from this question is that creating personal experiences and personal connections with students is so important. It's impactful,
crucial.
as you said.
Yeah.
When you reach out, things can change, and like you said, maybe they haven't had that experience yet, and so why not be the one that does that for them this time?
Be the inspiration.
Coordinate.
You could cut that out.